July 13th, 1945. Time Ghost Army Brigadier Seth Hanson would like to dedicate this memorial to his grandfather, Roy V. Hanson. More on that later. They're losing the war. That's obvious. The enemy has defeated them time and time again and is soon to invade the shores of their home islands. Do they have a plan? They do, and it's pretty ambitious. How ambitious? Well, it's called the Glorious Death of the 100 Million. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, the Australians invaded Borneo, again, at Balikpapan. There was renewed fighting in Burma that did not go well for the Japanese, and new American landings in the Philippines, which also did not bode well for the Japanese. Something else that might also not bode well for the Japanese is in the works this week. On July 9th, the Alamogordo bombing range is renamed the White Sands Proving Ground. This is ahead of next week's planned Trinity test, the first detonation ever of an atomic bomb. Hopefully. The test grounds is at the northern end of the range in Socorro County, near the towns of Carrizozo and San Antonio, New Mexico. One of the main criteria is that the test area be isolated, but 500,000 people do live within 250 kilometers of the test site. Although the only actual physical structures in the near-ish vicinity are the McDonald Ranch House and its various buildings. And they're like 3.5 kilometers away to the southeast. They and the land were acquired by the US government back in 1942. The area has, in fact, been used as a testing grounds for bomb components, and there is no grazing permitted or anything like that. The bomb to be tested is an implosion-designed plutonium bomb, which they just call the Gadget. This is the Fat Man design. As we saw in our How to Build an Atomic Bomb special, there are 2 different bomb designs for 2 different approaches. Worries about the Fat Man design actually working have led to this test, which has been named Trinity by Robert Oppenheimer, who directs the Los Alamos Research Laboratory, who are responsible for the design and construction of the bombs. There has also been the worry that if the test fails, they'll lose $1 billion worth of plutonium with nothing to show for it. So they've built Jumbo, a containment vessel for an unsuccessful explosion. This is a cylindrical thing, over 7.5 meters long with a 3-meter diameter. Its walls are just under 36 centimeters thick, and it weighs 194,000 kilos. It is the heaviest thing that has ever been shipped by rail. Thing is, by the time it arrived here in May, they were making enough plutonium so that Oppenheimer figured they had enough for a second test even if the first one failed. And Jumbo would interfere with data gathering, which is the main takeaway from a working test. And anyhow, a strong explosion would likely vaporize Jumbo, and a weaker one cause it to explode and send fragments everywhere, which would be a hazard to both people and measuring equipment. So it's now going to be in a tower over 700 meters away in case they need it for any subsequent test. There was a rehearsal test in May to calibrate instruments and make sure the process was smooth. A few hundred meters southeast of Ground Zero, a 6-meter-high wooden platform was built, and 81 tons of high-explosive hexalite were stacked there. The test went off 4:37 a.m. May the 7th. The fireball was visible 100 kilometers away, but the observation B-29 above hardly felt it, though the pilot sure saw it and said the explosion was beautiful. There was also very little shock at base camp 16 kilometers away. The crater caused by the blast was 9 meters wide and 1.5 deep. They did learn a bunch of lessons from this test, particularly practical ones. They needed more vehicles, better roads, more radios, more phone lines. The phone system actually got overloaded that day. They also needed to bury the phone lines, and they need a teletype for direct communications with Los Alamos. All that stuff has been taken care of by now. Well, they did a trial assembly of the actual bomb last week on the 3rd, though it did not have active components or explosive lenses. The lenses arrived this week on the 7th and 10th, and the assembly of the nuclear capsule begins today the 13th at the McDonald Ranch House. The initiator that kickstarts the chain reaction is put together and put inside the 2 hemispheres of the plutonium core. The core is then put in the tamper plug. Gold foil fills the air gap so it's sealed tight, and the 2 halves of the plug are closed with uranium screws at the domed ends. Now, the actual bomb to be dropped over Japan is to be dropped from a plane, right? Detonation in the air will maximize the energy that hits the target and will generate less fallout. And to sort of simulate that effect, here it's going to be detonated at the top of a 30-meter tower. At the base of the tower, the 48-kilo capsule is lowered into the bomb, hoisted by using a temporary eye bolt in the bomb. A uranium plug is screwed in to replace the eye bolt, a boron disc is placed on top, an aluminum plug screwed in, the two high-explosive lenses are installed, and the top duralumin cap is bolted into place. This is finished at 4:45 in the afternoon, today, July 13th. The arming and detonation are to take place next week. As for U.S. President Harry Truman, the guy who decides ultimately whether or not to drop such a bomb on Japan, he is at sea this week, heading for Antwerp, and from there to Germany for the Terminal Conference in Potsdam with British and Soviet leaders. This is not to say that the Japanese are not being attacked this week. American and British carrier forces hit the Japanese home islands. And just the carrier groups, Bull Halsey and John McCain have 15 carriers, 8 battleships, 15 cruisers, and 55 destroyers. This kicks off the 10th with 1,022 planes attacking Tokyo. The fight on Borneo also continues, mainly near Balikpapan, which the Australian 7th Division invaded last week. The Allies secured Sepingan airfield, but still have to take Mangar field. The Australians begin to move on it already the 4th, but it takes 5 days to eliminate the excellent Japanese positions on a ridge north of the airfield. The final positions are taken now on the 9th, and removing the enemy's ability to interfere with the airfield operations there is an objective of the whole Operation OBOE2. That's the Balikpapan operation. They've also been clearing up the highway northeast of Balikpapan. This is the general situation. By the second week in July, the 7th Division had commenced 3 geographically dispersed operations, all of which required their own logistical support. Suitable landing beaches for the heavier craft had slowed the rate of boat-to-shore transfer of equipment and stores. This said, there was no undue concern with the delivery of logistics support to the Balikpapan operation. In China, there has been a plan in motion by the Chinese Nationalist Army to recover Guilin and Liuzhou in Guangxi from the Japanese. This would set the stage for a general offensive. Part of this involved sending the 2nd Area Army to take Nanning, which they did at the end of May. Further advances culminated with the fall of Liu Cheng at the end of June. This paved the way for Chinese 46th Corps to hit Liuzhou itself, which they took June 29th, forcing a disordered Japanese retreat towards Guilin. The Chinese advance on Guilin is in 3 columns, on and parallel to the Guilin-Liuzhou highway. Meanwhile, 4th Area Army made attacks towards Henyang. All forces have been ordered to take Guilin by the end of July. This week, along the Guilin-Liuzhou railway line, the Chinese advance, taking several points and advancing to only like 60 kilometers from Guilin itself. As for somewhere where the Japanese have already been defeated, I mentioned a couple weeks ago that American construction crews are busy transforming the island of Okinawa and have been doing so since even before the battle there ended, to turn it into a staging ground for hundreds of thousands of troops from which to attack the Japanese home islands. Here are some numbers. Reading the future, I can see what they will be from the official history of the Navy's base building program, and which are also found in Ian Toll's Twilight of the Gods. By the close of 1945, naval facilities on Okinawa covered 20,000 acres and included 4,108 lineal feet of wharves, 712,000 square feet of general covered storage, 11,778,000 feet of open storage, 193,000 cubic feet of cold storage, as well as storage for 8,820,000 gallons of aviation gasoline, 30,000 barrels of diesel oil, 50,000 barrels of fuel oil, 13,000 square feet for ammunition. Aviation repair shops covered 324,100 square feet, and general repair shops 91,000 square feet. Hospital space amounted to 338,000 square feet, and quarters 4,755,000 square feet. A CB put it more succinctly: our development of Okinawa was to be comparable to the total development of Rhode Island from virgin forest land. The Allies are pretty much pulling out all the stops in the preparations to defeat Japan. Japan, in case you've forgotten, is last man standing against the Allied forces, and Japan's defeat seems inevitable. However, the same institutional defects that had produced Japan's irrational decision to launch the war in 1941 now prevented a rational decision to end it. There was no real locus of responsibility or accountability in Tokyo. Power was dispersed in piecemeal fashion across various military staffs and bureaucracies. Army and Navy leaders were figureheads who could be manipulated, deposed, replaced, or even killed by younger officers down the ranks. A sudden turn from war towards peace would require the compliance of many widely scattered interests and players, including officers in the middle ranks of both services. So even though from the emperor all the way on down, there are an awful lot of people who want peace, there aren't that many who openly or even semi-openly advocate it. And plans have been going ahead for Ketsugo, the operational plan for repelling the Allied invasion of the home islands, for 3 months now. The Supreme War Direction Council, SWDC, is in effect mobilizing for an all-out defense, even as they ask the neutral Soviets to mediate a peace with the Allies. And I mean all out when I say all out. The Ketsu plan calls for sinking literally all of Japan's remaining military and economic assets and resources into fighting an invasion. This involves an enormous troop buildup, mobilizing loads of newly recruited divisions and every possible reserve, deploying huge amounts of force to anywhere they think is an invasion target, building up mighty inland fortifications behind the likely invasion beaches, and recruiting the largest kamikaze pilot fleet they can. They are, in fact, correct with their assumption that Kyushu will be attacked first, followed by an invasion of the Kanto Plain and the Tokyo area next year. These are the Allied plans, and they have been hard at work. Back in January, there were 11 fully mobilized divisions on Japan's home islands. But starting in April, they've not only been building new ones, but bringing others over from Manchuria and Formosa. By now in July, there are a full 30 frontline divisions here, 24 more divisions for coastal defense, 2 armored divisions, 7 armored brigades, 3 infantry brigades, and 23 IMBs, independent mixed brigades. And that is a lot of force. This month, a lot of that force is being sent to Kyushu. 15 divisions, 7 IMBs, 3 tank brigades, and with the coastal defense units on top of that, we're talking a defense strength there of over 800,000 men. And this is only July. The American plan is to attack November 1st. However, I do have to point out that, at least at the moment, not all of these guys are properly equipped or even armed, and frontline units on Kyushu figure they only have ammunition for a few weeks. But beyond this, at the same time, Tokyo stepped up efforts to organize, arm, and train civilian militias. All men between the ages of 15 and 60, and all women between the ages of 17 and 40 were drafted into these local fighting organizations, whose enlistment rolls officially topped 25 million. Many were equipped with nothing better than spears or household weapons. Every citizen fighter was exhorted to kill at least one barbarian invader before dying in turn. These preparations proceeded under the new national slogan, "The Glorious Death of the 100 Million." For the last month or so, the Japanese Air Force, what's left of it, no longer defends against American raids, saving all planes and pretty much all fuel until that last campaign. There are currently around 9,000 planes around Japan, and just about all of these, including training planes, are going to be sent as kamikazes against the Allied invasion fleet. They expect to be able to build another 2,500 by the end of September. And since they don't have a lot of gas left, pilot training now is down to just taking off and a few basic in-flight maneuvers. There's no training for landings, and the pilots will mainly remain grounded until their suicide missions. And here are a few notes to end the week. On July 9th, Dr. Alan Nunn May, a British physicist who works on nuclear fission, gives Soviet Colonel Nikolai Zabotin, a military attaché at the Soviet embassy in Ottawa, Canada, what Zabotin describes to Moscow as 162 micrograms of uranium-233. in the form of acid contained in a thick lamina. Zabutin is actually in charge of the GRU's intelligence operations in Canada. GRU handles Soviet intelligence outside of the USSR. Dr. May was a member of the British Communist Party in the 1930s, though his membership lapsed in 1940. Since January 1943, he's been working with the Montreal Laboratory, who set up the nuclear reactor at Chalk River near Ottawa, and he also passes copied library research documents on nuclear power to the Soviets. The Soviets already know, thanks to Klaus Fuchs, that the Americans are doing experiments designed to create an atomic bomb. On the 12th, British commander Bernard Montgomery presents Soviet commanders Georgy Zhukov and Konstantin Rokossovsky with British medals. Knight Commander of the British Empire, KBE, at the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin. Vasily Sokolovsky and Mikhail Malinin are awarded Order of the British Empire, OBE. Also on the 12th, the British Air Ministry launches Operation Surgeon, which is basically a plan to take Germany's aviation expertise, partly to take loads of German equipment to Britain, but also to forcibly remove aviation experts from Germany so they don't fall into Soviet hands, with the fear being that if that happens, the Soviets could maybe build an air force better than any other. They have drawn up a list of 1,500 scientists and technicians that they want. Even on day one, though, many of those on the list have already offered their services to the British, or the Swedes, or the Swiss, or others, and most consider working for the Soviets an absolute last resort. And the week ends. With action on Borneo and in China, the president soon to join the British and Soviet leaders to talk about the future, an atomic bomb test in the immediate future, a secret weapon that the Soviets are actually aware of that they don't know how to make their own, and Japanese defense plans. I talked about the over 10,000 theoretical kamikazes the Japanese hope to have ready by the invasion. American air raids do destroy a lot of Japanese planes on the ground, but many of these by now are in reality plywood fakes, while the actual planes are dispersed and hidden all over. And they won't have to use the airstrips that American air power keeps cratering either. They only have to take off, not land. And they can use just a crappy dirt strip for that. Japanese air power, virtually entirely kamikazes, damaged 368 Allied ships and sank 38 during the Battle of Okinawa. Off Kyushu, they will enjoy several advantages that they did not have there, though. First of all, it's a shorter flight by far, so much less time to be intercepted. Also, they can take off from loads of airstrips all over Japan, so they can come at the invasion fleet from a bunch of different directions all at the same time. Tough to defend against that. The Imperial Japanese Navy is also developing and producing suicide submarines and suicide speedboats. Even suicide gliders might be on the cards, taking off from mountain peaks. The overall plan states the aim is to destroy a quarter, 25%, of the Allied invasion fleet. That seems like it might be out of reach, but what if they just get half of that, or a quarter of that? It is not at all unrealistic that kamikaze attacks off of Kyushu will cause far, far more blood and destruction than they did off of Okinawa. And to what end? As I said at the beginning, Time Ghost Army Brigadier Seth Hanson dedicates this memorial to his grandfather, Roy V. Hanson, who was born May 25, 1923. When he was young, Roy started helping out his father on the family dairy farm, a career that he would follow for the rest of his life. When the United States entered the war, Roy was exempted from military service because his work was considered vital. This wasn't the case for all farmers, but it applied for families who had only one son, as with Roy. Seth does say that if the war had gone on long enough, Roy would eventually have been called up to serve. Roy's farm grew wheat, oats, corn, and hay. The corn, oats, and hay were fed to the cows, horses, and any other animals on the farm. The wheat and the milk from the cows were sold at market, and the prices rose significantly because of the war. Seth tells us that a 5-gallon can of milk sold for $2.70 and a bushel of wheat for 74 cents. Even though their work was vital, farmers like Roy and his father struggled with fueling their tractors during the war. Sure, they received a larger fuel allowance, but things were still tricky. The fuel situation also meant that they also couldn't go so often to the nearest town, which was 10 miles away. Roy stayed on the farm for the whole war. Later, he married Seth's grandmother, Lorraine, in 1957. They moved a mile away to start their own dairy farm and had 4 kids. Roy continued farming the rest of his life until he passed away in 2012, leaving Seth with many happy memories. I will finish off with some of Seth's words. He loved farming, and my memories of him are riding with him on tractors, doing the field work, or going with him to get parts to fix something on the farm. He always had to go home and eat lunch at 12:30, no matter what he was doing, to the annoyance of my dad, who my grandpa helped after retiring. They say an army marches on its stomach. Well, without men like Roy and his father, then America, the U.S. Armed Forces, and much of the Allied coalition would have gone hungry. And after the war, even America's former enemies will benefit from their hard work. If you would like to memorialize an episode of this series, you can do so by joining the Time Ghost Army at Brigadier level for 1 year or by making a one-time donation. You can join the Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.